had compassion on Edmund Turner and took him in, and he spent his last days there at his place. The story about, someone mentioned here earlier about Cova being buried and then taken up and moved to Cave City. That is in a deposition that Lee Collins gave in a court trial there at Brownsville. And he affirmed in that that actually happened. There were some bad feelings, and Collins explained that in the deposition between some of the families. And so Mr. Edwards didn't want his daughter buried in the same cemetery, so he had her dug up, moved to Cave City. The day that they took her out of the ground, Emily Woods, a lady who lived out there on Flint Ridge, had died, and they buried her in the same hole. We were talking about that. That's recycling at its best here in Edison County. But today, the grave there, no one has went to the trouble to put up a marker for Emily. And it's just a vacant spot there that we know that there's a body there, but that's it. There's no footstone or headstone.
Just a shallow depression.
Yeah. Harry Bush was born March the 25th, 1910. In Velma back here, several years ago, I got interested in finding out something about Harry's family, about the Bush family. And she sent me a long letter. I've still got that, Velma. And she went into detail, the genealogy of the Bush family and Jim Bush and his various wives. He had, I don't know about what, he had a state press wedding suit from the appearance of it. It just every little bit he was married. Cova was his second wife. And then after they divorced, he was married another time or two. But can you remember him, Jim Bush, can you remember?
How many times he was married?
No, can you actually remember seeing him or remembering him? I believe Geraldine could, Mike's mom.
No, it was Harry.
Jim.
Oh, Jim or Harry?
Jim.
Yeah.
You can remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right.
He hasn't been dead that long. No.
Okay. All right, and then,
He was a good fellow.
yeah. And then Harry, he went to North Carolina, didn't he? When he left here. Okay.
North Carolina, Alabama. His son was in not long ago. A couple of years. Harry's. I think Harry also.
Yeah.
I think he visited the cave here. Did you talk to him, Greg?
Yes, I didn't realize who he was, but, yeah, I spoke with him.
That was on Jim and Cole.
When did COVID die?
She died July the 10th, 1924, at the Great Onyx Hotel. That's from the Bible, the family Bible.
So, but Edmund Turner was, when did he die?
1917.
So he would have already been buried there?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
for quite some time. 7 years, you're about.
But she was buried there too and then dug back up much later?
Yeah, you see, one of the things is that the L.P. Edwards, the Baptist church there on Flint Ridge was his usual church, but they rotate churches, the Baptists do that, at least at that time. And the year that Edmund died, L.P. Edwards wasn't there. He was in a different church. The preacher in charge was a Rance Curson. And so apparently it was okay that Edmund was buried there, even though he wasn't buried exactly on the hallowed ground of the cemetery itself. He was buried off the edge of it by a few feet. And so apparently when COVID died, that didn't sit right with LP. But it's funny that he even allowed her to be buried there in the first place.
There you go.
I never did figure that
That's
out.
the question.
I mean,
Why
that's a real good question.
bother?
Yeah, I mean, certainly he knew that Edmund was there, you know.
What happened to her? She had to have been young if her father was still alive to,
Yeah, she
to
wasn't
get all
very
your-
old. She was a nurse, wasn't she?
Yeah.
and what, she was
A
young?
nurse.
She was young?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excuse me, when did Jim Bush marry
1909.
Jim You know when in 1909?
Not, all the Bible has is 1909.
See, the reason I say that, you said that Harry Bush was born March 25th of 1910. Do you think the reason it's not, the date's not in there, that it's possible she was already pregnant? I mean, we go back 9 months.
Well, I'd say that they were legally married somewhere, because if they weren't, I don't know how that, they, like the kidnapping deal.
Right.
He kidnapped
But
his
I
own
mean,
son.
before they got married, before Jim and.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know,
It's
that's
very
possible.
conceivable she was already pregnant, right?
That's possible.
And it's, and.
But the thing is, I don't know for sure what year Edmund came here from New York.
Right.
It could have been 1909. Yeah, I mean, to stay.
Right.
And, or it could be 1910. I've heard 1911 and 1912. But Dossie Dome's cave was in operation.
1912.
Yeah, and the photographer took the brochure pictures prior to that opening, and that was a gentleman from Roseburg, was the photographer.
Well, now, he's in the 1910 census in New York, isn't he, Edmund Turner?
Yeah, when he's living with a brother there, and at that time, that's when his father dies, Edmund's father dies, and they all receive like a pittance of an inheritance, and that's the money that he came down here on, to dig around, find a cave, and things like that.
Hadn't he visited here in New York though before he moved here? So
Yeah.
it's conceivable he visited here in 1909 or whatever, and he still would be up here in the 1910 New York census,
We
correct?
thought he had bought from Floyd. Floyd was selling things supposedly up at Mammoth Cave Hotel, and Edmund first met Floyd selling artifacts, perhaps Indian artifacts, and wasn't the story that Floyd was to mail things back to him
up
in New York?
to him in New York, yeah.
We don't want to say L.P. Edwards is a nice Baptist minister fibbed, but the stories that they mentioned the peach pits.
Yeah.
Because he said, no, there's an obvious hole on the hillside that takes you into Great Onyx. Edmund probably had to dig it out and crawl in, but that entrance is gated by the Park Service the way Edmund probably originally got in. It's not a commercial entrance today.
Right.
It's sort of hidden over to the side. But the story after the rest of you amplify on this, after Edmund said he had found it, L.P. Edwards said, no, he had found it at Bransford Spring, near where the Bransford Hotel, for black visitors to the cave, there on the top of the ridge. There's a spring in the Bransford Pump House where it used to be. There's a place where water goes underground. There apparently was some place that made peach brandy or distilled peaches.
Right.
And the peach pits supposedly washed in the spring and came out of the spring on the hillside. There is a spring right below Great Onyx entrance. And because that L.P. Edwards said he knew that the cave was there because the peach pits were going from Bransford, sinking stream, coming out the spring, and therefore that's how he discovered the cave.
Yeah. According to the book that obviously Edwards sponsored, it was a trip through fairyland.
Yes.
Written by Annette Lynn. He said, according to that story, that when John Slimmons on the cave, he told his daughter to go rake out the big spring, and because it had a tendency of getting stopped up. He came back and said it was sand and peach stones. He went down there and he saw that it was actually sawdust. He got to thinking that his brother-in-law, Shackelford, who lived about a mile from him, owned a peach brandy distillery and a sawmill. You know, how did that get there? When Edwards, after Edwards married Sally, and the couple got older, they moved in with them. Slimmons told him that story, and he said, "Oh well, it must have been washed in by an underground river." But that was just the story he told to Annette Lynn, which was obviously a lie.
For the book.
For the book, just to write the book. And the book was written just as a publicity.
Right about in here, I want to tell you that Edwards married Sally Slimmons. Here is John Slimmons' picture. Okay, John Slimmons and Sinai Davis. This was his first wife. Their first two daughters, this was kin to Mr. Whittle, that we all know.
Charlie Will.
Charlie Whittle. And this one was kin to Mr. Gergen, who lives in Kansas City. This was his second family, Elvira, and anybody can use this if they want to. He had 2 sons that died, and it looks like he had 5 daughters. One of which name was Sarah Ann Slemons. Now, John Slemons inherited some property that was owned by his father, Ebenezer Smith Slemons, that came from Pennsylvania. John inherited his father's property. John went to live in later life with his daughter Sarah Ann Slemons, who married Porter Edwards. That cave property came from Ebenezer Smith Slemons, down through John Slemons, ended up with his daughter and his granddaughter Lucy. Okay? So the original property belonged to Ebenezer Smith Slemons. Now, Sarah Ann Slemons was born in 1870. So we're going back a little bit. I don't know about Porter Evans, but he was the one that caused all the mischief. But that cave property was hers. So,
She heired that.
well, from
And-
John,
Yeah, and they bought out the rest of the heirs. There's a deed there, Brownville, or the,
well, they bought out some of them. They
Yeah.
didn't buy out the Whittles, and they didn't buy out Ebenezer.
And they still own me.
And they still, because Ebenezer
well, if you
was,
could get it out of the widow,
yeah.
they were all lawyers.
Well, they're mad too. They're mad too.
We've
We've talked to them.
been,
Here is the picture here of Porter Edwards and Sally and their daughter. What was the little girl's name? Kovac?
Coco.
There they are.
Is Lucy in there too? I'd like to see her.
I don't think Lucy. We've met Lucy. Don and I came down, went through the cave when Lucy was here. But
Did you get those copies down that you brought today?
you all can have
No, no.
any of this.
Give those, give them to everyone there.
I have still pictures of Lucy. I have very much my grandmother's.
You know, now, Rick, you're asking about, Rick, you're asking about, is it possible that, that Harry Cox was Edmund's child?
That Harry Bush,
Yeah,
was Edmund Turner.
yeah, he was adopted later,
Right, and adopted later.
by Lucy, yeah.
So,
Don't know. I mean, how can you pick one or the
No,
other?
I know, because
There are cave guys that, at that time, Shorty Coates is one, that would swear up and down, oh yeah, that was Edmund's child.
and now wait, how are you kin to Lucy? You're kin to her husband, right?
But you
No,
don't,
you can't, because, I mean, he was talking about when he was born March 25th, 1910, but all it says is he married Jim Bush
Well, that was her father.
in 1909.
Okay.
So there's.
Yeah, just pass them out.
And who they bought out, I don't know. I think it's just her sisters or other
Yeah,
sisters.
there's a deed there where they bought out a bunch of the heirs.
Well, I think her other 4 sisters.
Huh?
I think it was her other 4
Well, it
sisters.
could have been, I
The
just
Whittles
remember part of
didn't,
the.
the Gergens didn't.
Well, now, that's,
But I thought I'd give you a little bit of background on who these folks are. That's my husband. That just gets
go ahead, Bill.
I got a question. From a collector's standpoint, and maybe I can enlist the help of some of the audience here, what are some of the known collectibles that would have Edmund Turner's name on it? I can list a few things. I know with the Mammoth Cave and Kentucky Cave region book, that has Edmund Turner references. Of course, the Dossie Domes brochure.
yeah.
Then, of course, the postcards, early 1915 postcards, Great Onyx Cave, that series. And then there's one more, and I don't know, he's back in the conversation, but I've got a magazine that actually references Edmund Turner, they're writing a feature about Great Onyx Cave, and they actually reference Edmund Turner in that article, and also giving credit for some of the photos, the postcards there. Is there anything else known? Or is that like all there is? Where's Gordon?
Someone had his compass.
Yeah.
Who was
That's a
that?
good point. I saw that.
That was an eBay purchase or something?
Well, yeah, I heard that turned up in Illinois, which the town, everything goes back to
Attorney for Neville.
Neville.
The attorney for Neville and then, now that's owned by Dean Snyder. We've seen that, Edmund Turner's compass, because he was clearly good at surveying.
Mm-hmm.
This picture here shows Cova, Lucy, and Harry. And the top one is,
If you would, the picture I just passed around, Norman's gonna tell you guys who they are.
and the top one shows Cova's, the day that they buried her. And Mr. and Mrs. Edwards and Harry Bush standing there by the grave. And you can look at that in relation to where the Shackleton grave is inside the fence and see where that grave is. And tomorrow, when you go out there, remember that. You go around in front and look. And there's a slight depression there where the,